Well, good morning. Good morning to everyone who's joining in with us today. We're so excited to have this opportunity to connect with all of you again. My name is Byron Deese, founder of the Dream Makers Network and CEO of Engage Wealth, and just couldn't be more excited to introduce this new platform that we have called Dream Makers Presents Good Trouble. Now, why are we trying to get into good trouble? And if you guys remember, the late John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, would always say, get into some good trouble, necessary trouble. And I've always stuck with that when we're thinking about all the things how we spend our time, the things that we do, how we're getting involved in different things, whether it be in our business, our communities, our families, particularly politically. And we're always looking for some good trouble. And with the Dream Makers Network, we are always trying to carve out ways and connect with folks throughout the country who are focused on doing great things in the community, focused on doing great things in their homes and in their businesses, and create these opportunities where we can get into some good trouble. And so just to tell you a little bit more about our Dream Makers Network, we started the Dream Makers Network back in 2008. So it's crazy to recognize how long it's been. Really as an effort to organize young professionals in Philadelphia during the 2008 presidential campaign. And, it's interesting how we're young professionals, a couple of years out of college, everyone's, out having a good time being young professionals. But there was a major campaign happening at that time for president. And there was Hillary Clinton, and there was Barack Obama, and there was John McCain. And so many different folks were actively involved. And we were at that age where we needed to get involved and wanted to try to make a difference. And one of the things that really led to organizing this network is while door knocking every day, getting out, trying to get folks out to vote, we got a chance to learn more about the everyday concerns and issues that people were having across the socioeconomic, spheres, if you will. Wanting to be in a situation where you could definitely make sure people were registered to vote and able to take advantage of the process of being a part of that political process, but also recognizing that it was definitely going to require more, that government and policy was only one part of the solution. And so the network, we continue to stay in those communities, to bring resources, to make sure we identify folks who are in healthcare, who are in business, who are in finance, who are in education, who are in early child care, who could also play an active role in making a difference in the lives of families. And since that time, it's amazing that almost 20 years has passed. But since that time, we may not be as young professionals anymore, but we are still actively engaged, wanting to make a difference and connecting with people across the country to do just that. And which leads me to why I'm so excited about this conversation. We're getting ready to meet with and get a chance to speak with one of the leaders here in Central Florida, the Central Florida Foundation, Mr. Stephen Jerina, who's the Vice President of Philanthropy and Partnerships with the Central Florida Foundation. And Stephen, are you on?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I couldn't be more excited and just thankful that you had a time to connect with us here with the Dream Makers Network and touch on this topic, and in many ways introduce the topic of philanthropy to folks who may have heard the word, but hadn't really, kind of unpack what that means for them and how they can actually participate in the philanthropic process. But then at the same time, when they hear the word Central Florida Foundation, what does that mean? How can folks be a part? And how does it play in the role of really addressing some of the issues in communities throughout the country? So with that, I'd like to just take a second to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about the Central Florida Foundation.
Yeah, thanks, Byron. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Vice President of Philanthropic Strategies and Partnerships here at the Central Florida Foundation. And at the Central Florida Foundation, we're Central Florida's community foundation. So we really work at the intersection of philanthropists, donors, invested citizens of Central Florida, and nonprofits and businesses and government. We're at the intersection of doing good deeds here in Central Florida with people's hard-earned money, right?
Mm.
Whether they're business owners, whether they're just regular people walking down the street who just care about where they live. We're at the intersection of all of it. So we are a leader and convener here in the community of Central Florida. That's what we do. My role is really leading our philanthropic strategies team, working with philanthropists here in Central Florida, whether they're business owners, whether they're really anybody who just cares about Central Florida, helping them think about what they can do with their philanthropic dollars, the dollars they're interested in donating, and how they can best make an impact in Central Florida, while also maybe incorporating their family values, maybe working with their advisors if they're thinking about pivoting from business to philanthropy,
Mm.
right? Maybe they're just looking at getting organized. They've been giving and they're looking for someone to help them get organized in the charitable space. We cover all of that. And I know that's a lot, but it's all really important work to catalyze a more generous Central Florida.
I love it. I love it. And I will say, and throughout my career, I've worked with community foundations for
Right.
over 15 years in managing retirement plans and then ultimately serving on boards for community foundations throughout the country. And so it's very interesting because a lot of times folks don't know the work that community foundations provide for through neighborhoods and partnering
Right.
with businesses
Right.
and even partnering with local government. And I
Right.
think it's important to begin to unpack what that really means. One thing that, going back to that example that I mentioned earlier, and we're talking about good trouble,
Yep.
where we're trying to organize folks to get out to vote and why they should care about voting, but then learning about some of the issues that may not actually be on that prioritized agenda for either political party.
Right.
Folks coming right out of prison and may have trying to get back to work, or families who have early child care issues. And so a lot of these different pieces. And when you think about the role of government, the role of the philanthropic community, the role of business, how do you guys partner in many ways to even address some of these issues from a public-private partnership perspective? Any examples that you can share with us?
For us, when it comes to interfacing with government, a lot of times the government doesn't necessarily have maybe the capacity or the knowledge to understand what nonprofit organizations are serving Central Florida and how these nonprofit organizations maybe are working together or how they can work together. We can serve as a lead primary contact point interfacing between nonprofit organizations and our public sector entities right now. And it doesn't necessarily need to be just nonprofits, right? It can be
Mm-hmm.
donors and it can be businesses as well. We really serve at the intersection of every single one of those spaces in our economy,
Mm.
right? Even though we are a nonprofit entity ourselves, right? We, as a leader and convener in Central Florida, bring together businesses, donors, nonprofits, and government together to move the needle on issue areas.
Mm.
Now, the interesting thing is that philanthropy is inherently private action for public good. And
Okay.
there are spaces where our governments, federal, state, local, are willing to, invest in, right? And then there's things that businesses are willing to invest in as well, right? And the nonprofit space lives in the massive middle of all of that,
Mm.
right? And so where governments feel like they can't work and where businesses feel that there's not really opportunities there, the nonprofit space fits in the middle. Now, what we do at the Central Florida Foundation is, regardless of what issue area it is that we serve as the local catalyst to kind of bridge the gap between all those players. And that's really, really important because there's really no other organization that can be issue agnostic and politically agnostic to
Mm-hmm.
bring everybody to the table together as investors in our community, as community stakeholders, as good citizens. Now, there's 900 community foundations across the country.
Mhm.
We serve Central Florida. There's one serving Northeast Florida. There's one serving Tampa. There's over 900 of us. And we all kind of do the same thing. And we all are hyper local. And I think that's really, really important. We are apolitical. We serve and have knowledge across all issue areas, but we're hyper local. And that's really, really important.
I think it probably is important for us to kind of talk through philanthropy and how, when you think about private donors, if you will,
Yeah.
and to talk through the differences in how, a dollar earned can become a dollar donated, and how that donated dollar can ultimately reach a community in need that may not have received resources from their local government, but
Right.
they're trying to find other ways to see funding reach that community. Can we talk a little bit about, for instance, like the difference between like a private foundation and then some of the services that are made available through community foundations?
Right. So philanthropists can come in all shapes and sizes, and the community foundation serves all philanthropists of all shapes and sizes, right? But the ability to do certain things with different charitable vehicles, obviously scale allows you to do more as someone who's interested in being charitable.
Mhm.
So if you have a tremendous amount of wealth and you're looking to maintain a certain level of control, right? And that's really, really key. And
Mhm.
control is really important to you. You're passionate about a specific issue area. Maybe you want to control how those charitable dollars are continually invested. Maybe you really want to be hands-on in terms of who you want to bring into that decision-making orbit. And if you have, I would say, over $10 million or more in charitable capital, you can consider tools like a private foundation. This is your own entity that you're setting up, right? You get to control the investment decisions, the grant making decisions, who's on the board, and you
Yep.
get to maintain a significant level of control over that. But they are administratively burdensome, right? People like the shininess that comes with having a private foundation, having a
Mhm.
foundation, but they're a lot of work because
Yeah.
they're an entity, right? You have to get your 990 done every year. You have to there's a lot of disclosure requirements. There are other tools available to philanthropists of all shapes and sizes, smaller donors or even larger donors who have more money than say 10 million to give away. And that can be something like a donor advised fund, or maybe you just are just maybe a little bit more organized yourself, right? You're not necessarily looking for a tool, right? But there are more cost effective vehicles that allow people to get organized charitably. And I would say the donor advised fund in particular is really democratizing the philanthropic ecosystem because it's allowing more philanthropists of all shapes and sizes to become organized. And when people get organized with their
Yeah.
charitable giving, they tend to actually become more charitable, which I would consider more civically engaged. And I think that's
That's right.
really, really important.
I think that you're right, because once you're organized and you know what you're supporting and what's your funding strategy to support those kind of prioritized favorite organizations and
Yeah.
causes, you'll do it ongoing and you'll market it. You'll tell more people about it, and
Yeah.
so I completely agree. I do think it's probably worth us talking about donor advised funds and what is that and how does one even access a donor advised fund?
Yeah. The donor advice fund's been around for a really long time, actually. It's not necessarily a new product, but it's gotten a lot more attention because it's grown significantly over the last 15, 20 years. The
Mhm.
last 10 years seen phenomenal growth.
That's
And we can
right.
talk about why in a little bit. But if a private foundation offers a lot of control on with your charitable giving because it's a separate entity, right? They tend to be funded by one individual or maybe one family. A donor advised fund is like a smaller, more nimble vehicle that is easier to open, it's easier to administer, but you don't get as much control. And that's really, really important. We can talk about that later.
Mhm.
But one way to think about it is like a poor man's foundation or your own mini foundation
Yeah.
or like I would say your charitable investment account at, just on your own, right? And community foundations have been offering donor advised funds to individuals for decades. They've just grown tremendously over the last 10 to 20 years. Every community foundation's bread and butter is a donor advised fund, but financial institutions like Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard offer them. There are faith-based donor advised fund sponsors, and there's also donor advised fund sponsors who are more just values alignment. They're a little bit more politically driven without, contributing to the political ecosystem. For instance, there's the Tides Foundation, which is a very progressive donor advised fund sponsor that is really focused on making grants to organizations in the progressive space. And then there's also donor advised fund sponsors on the inverse that are more libertarian and conservative focused.
Very
right?
true.
Community foundations are your local neighborhood oriented, regionally focused donor advised fund sponsor.
Yeah, I think that it's a great point in thinking about it that way. I have a couple of clients who've done actually both, where the family, I should say, the donor has a private foundation that, say, he and his wife or their spouse run together. But I've also seen where the family has come up and partnered with a donor, or particularly a community foundation, and created a family foundation that's administered through the local community foundation. So, but through the vehicle of a donor advised fund. Have you seen some of those models and other models similar to that, where it's kind of a dual use, if you will?
It's very common, and it's actually becoming more and more common. And I would argue that's part of the reason the donor advised fund ecosystem has exploded.
Okay.
Private foundations were the vehicle of choice in the 90s, right? Well, people love the idea of having a private foundation, and that's great. They're great tools, but they become administratively burdensome very, very quickly. You love the idea of having a foundation and you love giving back to your community, but at the end of the day, no one really loves administering their private foundation. And unless you have a lot of wealth, you have to still have a pretty large private foundation in order to pay staff.
And that's worth even talking about. It's kind of like if your wealth level is below a certain amount, is probably worth you doing a donor advised fund versus a private foundation. Maybe like a rule of thumb in there. Correct.
Yeah, I always say 10 million is kind of that threshold, in my opinion. For 10, you can do it for less, but in my opinion, a private foundation needs to have 10 million in it in order to be cost effective. And that's really, really critical. And that's not talking about hiring staff. It's just being cost effective. You can probably do it at 5, but I would say to really, is the juice worth the squeeze at 5? Maybe. It probably is at 10. Now, what we're seeing is a lot of folks who the wealth creator has since passed, the ones who maybe started the business, sold the business, opened up the private foundation, right? They have since passed on, and now the children or the grandchildren are now, for all intents and purposes, running the private foundation, and they are realizing that it's administratively burdensome. So a couple things are happening. They're either dissolving the private foundation into a donor advised fund, right, which is something you can do, or they still like the private foundation for whatever reason, right? It gives the family an opportunity to come together, have family meetings, talk about, values and stories, right? It's the earth that keeps a high net worth family together. It's the tool that's used to pass down values. But what they do is the private foundation then basically funds donor advised funds for the kids and the grandkids to catalyze individual philanthropy. And maybe those donor advised funds are in the communities where those families live. The private foundation is maybe still in kind of the ancestral homeland, so to speak, right? If that's a Midwest town up north, but maybe the grandkids have moved south, right? They can open up DAFs in the communities where those kids and grandkids live. So I call that a satellite DAF. It's just a bit donor advised fund, but they really serve as mini extensions of the private foundation, and we see that very, very frequently. Now, you can also have a donor advised fund, and you can run it just like a private foundation if you want. Community foundations very frequently will allow family meetings to be done for the family to make grant making decisions out of the donor advised fund. So it's very common. We see this very, very frequently, and it's allowing families to continue to be charitable regardless of the wealth or the tools, or whether it's Gen 1, 2, or 3, because family dynamics are, as you know, Byron, they're always unique and they're always different, and there's never a one size fits all solution. And so by bringing multiple tools to the table at different times, we can keep the family together. We can continue to allow the family to be charitable in the communities where not only the wealth was created, but where the wealth is currently headed, right? And the issue areas that are important to these donors and also to the community that need to be solved, money's flowing, and that's important.
This actually brings up a very specific topic around how entrepreneurs, businesses, corporations can participate in the philanthropic space. And there's always the concern that we have a lot of corporations and business owners who are doing really well, creating wealth, but aren't giving back to the communities where they've built their businesses, and particularly to address maybe some of the socioeconomic challenges in communities. And I think it's important for us to have a conversation that does at least allow a business owner and corporations who will get access to this information of how they can actually partner with a community foundation to really address that. It's not, I think there's an assumption that every business or every corporation has its own unique foundation that's doing the great work and, waving the flag of corporate responsibility. But that's not always the case, especially when we're talking about our small businesses who are, payroll focused, who are trying to create margins in their business and make at least have a profitable business, but at the same time are concerned about taxes and the whole nine. And so I always say, if we're trying to address taxes as an issue, then it's also think about what type of impact we want to make on the community and do things from a philanthropic perspective. And so what are some ways from that in best practices where businesses can participate with the community foundation and really increase their corporate responsibility efforts in the community?
Yeah, I think a lot of times businesses partner with the community foundation because, again, they are a community oriented business, right? They love where they live. The community is where their employees live. It's where the business owners live. It's the community that's giving back, that's building the wealth, right? But again, like you mentioned, they're margin focused, they're profit focused, right? So the trick is, how do you give back to your community while maintaining good profit margins, right? Which oftentimes means, all right, we have to be very streamlined and cost effective when it comes to giving back, right? So I often see businesses partnering with community foundations just for opening up a donor advised fund, right? They're looking for an easy vehicle to park their charitable dollars, right? That is not administratively burdensome. And a DAF solves that problem. But a DAF can also allow the business to get really creative with the impact proposition it's having in the community. And that's where the conversation really gets exciting, because what does the business want to do with its philanthropic dollars? Is the business an engineering firm? And do they want to support institutions in their community that are creating the next generation of engineers? It's the next generation of employees that are going to work at that firm. Okay, you have your donor advised fund, right? The money is already allocated to be given away. Then you can grant out money from the DAF to the institutions that you recruit from, right? Very straightforward. Maybe as a business, you're very interested in ensuring that your employees are also charitable, right? And this is really important. I really like this example because philanthropists aren't born, they're raised. They're educated. They're grown into it. Philanthropic people see other people be charitable, people that are influential to them, and therefore they adopt those habits.
That's right.
So if a business and a business owner is charitably themselves and they say, I value my community, my community's done very well for me, my family, and the business. I think this is important. I want my employees to go out and do good deeds too. And they know that's good for business, right? They know if they have their employees out there wearing their branded work, their branded materials, volunteering, giving money away, that is good business, good trouble, right? But
That's
you
right.
still have to make it administratively easy. It needs to be cost effective, right? You're not necessarily in the business of giving money away. You have a business to run. So you can use a donor advised fund to maybe match your employees' giving, right? You have the money parked away already. The employee brings the gift receipt to the business, and then maybe it's the HR person logs into the donor advised fund, just like logging into their bank, and they send a grant out on a 3-to-1 match on behalf of their employee, right? You can do that. And that's a really great way that I see businesses who are charitably minded, owned by charitably minded individuals that want to see their employees go out and do good work, right? They know it's good for business. It makes them feel good, but they need to be cost effective in doing that work. So a donor advised fund offers that solution. Now you can also use it for things like cause related giving, just general corporate philanthropy. All those are fine.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer in, you were talking about when we were younger in 2008. I was in college then. So instilling good attitudes and behaviors and paying it forward to the next gen is, I think, really, really critical. And how can we ensure as civically minded individuals that the people who are coming after us are taking care of their community? And I think the donor advised fund, in terms of this strategy with businesses and employee matching, is a really powerful way to do that.
The employee matching strategy in and of itself, I think, is huge, because I've seen the other side, right? And so, for instance, a lot of times, businesses who are saying we want to do something in the community, and they're just writing checks, is not done in any kind of structured, organized way. And meanwhile, many of their employees have kids who are participating in nonprofit youth programs, and they're shelling out money all the time to these nonprofit organizations because they are trying to keep their kids active and engaged. I remember when I was a kid growing up in Central Florida and being in actually our Little League teams. All of our teams were sponsored by a local business. I played for Rinker Material, which was the actual Rinker company in Sanford, Florida. Played for Railroader Cubs, so all these local businesses were sponsoring the teams. And that's another way to be able to have a local business. Maybe their uncles and grandparents and those have worked for those companies, but at the same time, they're reinvesting in the business reinvesting in the community, because those young people are growing up trying to stay out of trouble. They're learning a skill, they're learning leadership, they're learning teamwork. It's a great way to see the ecosystem work together through business, community, and really touching on all the socioeconomic aspects of local neighborhoods.
It's really true. And I think the Little League team supporters, story makes so much sense here, because every community needs great businesses to thrive, a strong public sector, and great nonprofits, right? And a Little League is a nonprofit for all intents and purposes, right?
Yeah.
So, we don't even think about that when our kids are oftentimes, they're going up to bat and, they hit that ball off the tee, and, the parents are taking pictures and they love that. That's a great moment. They cherish those moments forever.
Yeah.
Right. But it takes a civic sector to make that work. It takes an independent sector. It takes a nonprofit sector. And that means philanthropic dollars. I'm from small town Nebraska, a town of 5,000 people. And every year for the 4th of July, there was a massive local fireworks show. and everyone always went, right? And when you're little, right, you're enamored by the fireworks, and your parents are really watching the kids watch the fireworks, right? Well, well, fast forward 20 years, right? I'm now realizing that my insurance agent,
Hmm.
my hometown insurance agent, was one of the group of business owners locally who helped fund that fireworks show every year,
That's right.
right? That's philanthropy in action, right? That's building community. And who doesn't love that? The trick is, in order for that to continue and in order for more of that to happen, it takes getting organized,
Yeah.
right? And donor advised funds provide opportunities for philanthropists, donors of all shapes and sizes, to get organized. Um, Regardless of what stage in their life cycle they're at, whether they're a business owner, it really doesn't matter. But I'm realizing now that my local community, made that fireworks show happen every year through donations,
Yeah.
right? That fireworks show just didn't happen. The city just didn't have it in the budget every year, right? It just, it took civically minded people who cared about their community, who were willing to part way with their hard-earned dollars because it was important.
And thinking about that, because growing up in small town America, and we have our local fireworks, we have our
Yep.
local baseball teams, our local football teams, Pop Warner, and I remember even the same time I was in middle school running track,
Yeah.
AAU, and it was sponsored by local businesses. But
Yep.
and I think about it, when I actually was time for me to graduate from high school, when I was applying for as many scholarships as I could to help
Yeah.
go to college, one of those same local companies that sponsored the football or the baseball team I was on, actually I was able to get a scholarship from that same local organization. That's the same local
Right.
business. And so it does show the importance of how a
Right.
business can have a heart for the community, particularly, especially if they're hiring local folks from the community, but
Right.
then at the same time be able to have it part of their business model to bring in new dollars, but also identify as a tax strategy and public good how they can give back to that same community by sponsoring local teams, by giving scholarships and all the great things, and being able to, but they may have a concern around how do I organize that. And
Yeah.
partnering with the local community foundation is a great way to do that without having to hire new staff just to really execute that for their business.
Correct. You can think of your community foundation as your charitable back office, regardless of whether you're an advisor who's advising high net worth people on their charitable giving, or you're a business owner that's just looking to outsource the charitable process, right? The charitable back office can be your community foundation, but they are also your thought leader too, right? And if you're interested in knowing who's doing great work in food insecurity in our community, right? Your community foundation is going to know exactly who to call, right? And that's really, really important. That knowledge is an extraordinarily high value tool that community foundations are uniquely positioned in their communities to offer. And so it's not just charitable tax strategies and helping people get organized, though that's a big part of it. It's also local knowledge, knowing who's in your backyard doing really great work. I see a lot of people who give away money when they're just kind of starting. They're giving a lot of dollars to a lot of organizations, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're not really organized. Maybe they're attending a lot of galas in town because they've been invited, their friends are on it. So they're kind of all over the place, right? Maybe it's cancer assistance organizations and an animal hospital and their alma mater, right? And their house of worship. But if you sit down and you ask them, hey, is that something you really, really care about? I think you'd be surprised at some of the answers you get. There's probably a lot of people that'll be like, I really don't know if I do. So from a business ownership standpoint, a business is being charitable. What's important to the business? You need to answer that question. And a community foundation can also help that business owner like think about that in a really strategic, holistic way. Because businesses come in all shapes and sizes too,
Yeah.
right? Is it a family business? Is it just sort of an individual doing their own thing? Is it sort of become this big entity, right? And it's growing very quickly. You know, businesses come in all shapes and sizes. So the philanthropic strategy is going to look different for each one. And so the community foundation can meet that organization, that business owner where they're at, ask really great questions, and come up with a customized solution that really meets their needs, right? And by doing that, they get organized, and that results down the line in more philanthropic dollars flowing into the community.
Now, I got to tell you, I had to write down, you said something that I'm going to stick with me forever, is that you see your community foundation as your charitable back office.
Yep.
And I think that is a great way to think about it, especially when you think about having access to people like yourself and Mark and the whole team at Central Florida Foundation and all the other great community foundations throughout the country, having their expertise, your insight, your connections, your partnerships. It really helps to open up what your company can have access to, that you're just, so many of our small businesses are just raw entrepreneurs doing the best job that they can, but they don't. So many times they're lacking based on their network, if you will.
Right.
And so much of what you guys see on a day-to-day basis, they don't see it, and they don't know those. They don't have those relationships. So that's another way to think about the back office, if you will, from a charitable perspective. Talk a little bit about that and some of the support you guys have provided businesses and business owners in that back office approach.
Yeah, I would say the example from the employee matching, leveraging the donor advice fund is a really good example of like, hey, we're your charitable back office. We're there to support you. You can give us a call whenever you need us, and we'll answer the phone. You're going to know who your relationship manager is for all intents and purposes, right? They're going to know you in and out. They're going to be there to serve you, solve your problems when a problem does indeed arise.
Okay.
Right. I think that's really, really important. You can also be a charitable back office to a professional advisor, such as yourself. And this is really, really important because even though we're the community foundation, we don't necessarily know who's all out doing what and what their financial and tax situation looks like. And so a lot of advisors, such as financial advisors, estate planning attorneys, CPAs, use us as a charitable back office for how they serve their clients. So oftentimes the referral to the community foundation comes through whoever is the business owner's advisor. And that's really, really important because I like to think of business owners have a team of advisors. They have their football team, right? Yeah. And every football team has different individuals that serve a different purpose. And I like to think that your community foundation, your philanthropic advisor, your charitable back office is part of your special teams. They're not on the field all the time, right? But they're there when you have to call them in. They serve a very distinct purpose and they execute every single time. That's really, really important. Oftentimes, the CPA, the financial advisor, is the most trusted advisor. They're out there working full time for that business owner, right? But when they need help, they need a special team assist. They call in the community foundation. They serve as the charitable back office, and they help the business owner execute through the advisor.
I like that analogy, just in time for football season. Because
just in time. Go Pack, go.
Well, I saw my Ravens show off their new skills with the new defensive mindset. So yeah, I'm loving every piece of that analogy there. And also this is also a great segue in talking about how we can the multiple ways we can work with businesses. When I put on my daytime hat, as and running Engage Wealth and working with business owners and helping business owners to prepare to retire. Yeah. And many of them are just like, what do you mean retire? I'm just going to pass this down to my nephew or my
It's never that easy. It's never that easy. It's never that easy.
That's usually the big rude awakening that I have for a lot of clients is that it's like, what do you mean retire? I'm just going to pass it down to Junior over here. And meanwhile, Junior's like checked out. He's not interested in taking over that business. And so talking about helping entrepreneurs retire from their companies is the hottest topic and how I spend, let's say, 70% of my day. But at the same time, the role of a philanthropy and a community foundation, particularly as a back office, to help with that strategy, especially as you get closer to identifying maybe someone or a strategic partner who wants to buy the business or begin to buy shares of the business, the tax effects of that, and how do you prepare? And for folks who've said maybe throughout the years in business and they've thought about, hey, man, I like this philanthropy thing. I think I want to do more of that.
Right.
I always say that, if you practice becoming a philanthropist while you're in your business, in the throes of your business, then one day you sell your business and you really have resources to give back. Now that changes the game.
Yes.
Highlight any examples you have there that where folks have run their business, prepared to sell it, and the role that their donor advised fund and the community foundation played in the actual sale and some of the benefits there that folks may not be aware of.
Yeah. So going back to private foundation versus donor advised fund, because the private foundation offers more control, the tax benefits aren't as robust, right? You get assuming the business owner's tax oriented, right?
Yeah.
Which I imagine they are. A public charity offers better deductibility, right? Because you're parting more with the gift, right? The donor advised fund, though you can talk about it like a charitable giving account or a poor man's foundation, you actually don't own it. And this is really, really important, right? You're giving away the money. Now it functions like a charitable bank account for all intents and purposes. And that's really, really critical. That's how the whole industry works. But you retain the opportunity to advise on dollars out, on advising how the money is invested at your local community foundation, at your DAF sponsor. The sponsoring organization retains ultimate authority and control over assets in the donor advised fund. That being said, it's really, really important to think about philanthropy and charity from not only a tax efficiency standpoint when someone's exiting their business, but I contend that wealth creators, if they're successful and they've created a business and they're like the example you mentioned, maybe they're interested in Junior just taking it over. Well, does Junior really want the business? So a lot of the family and individual identities tied up in the business, right? How they're perceived in the community is tied up in the business. And so if you're thinking of an exit, not only is that a financial and a tax consideration, but it's also an identity conversation.
Yeah.
And so philanthropy serves as the tool to see identity continuation. I always like to say if a business owner is exiting their business, they can leverage philanthropy as the pivot into the next iteration of their life, as opposed to the sale of the business just sort of being the end, right? Because the end is messy.
Yeah.
It's and it may not be the ultimate end, but if they are at the tail end of their working career, right? Junior isn't necessarily interested in taking over the business. They value their community. Gosh, how can we maintain our family stature here, right? How can we build legacy? And the answer to that is through philanthropy. The family can continue to be investors in their community through philanthropy. And you can do that with a private foundation, sure, right? But if you're a privately held business, the donor advised fund offers better tax efficiency, right? And so you can not only meet your tax and financial considerations, but that legacy and those family conversations can continue down the line. Your community foundation can help facilitate those after you're no longer a business owner.
Exactly.
That charitable back office, right?
It's a holistic conversation, I always try to tell, at least advise business owners to have that conversation sooner than later.
Right.
Because a lot of times when folks are getting ready to exit their business and the transactions like tomorrow, and this, well, wait a second, can I set up my DAF now, and and all that jazz. But we want to make it part of the flow of how you run your business, the operations, the whole nine, and really showing value in the charitable back office that you mentioned.
It's really true, because, and it helps to have a great advisor in your corner, right? Because you can't just sell the business and open up a DAF, right? You can, but it's not going to be tax efficient, right?
Yeah.
This isn't about business, but, and I've talked about this example before. You can't just donate a house at 3 p.m. on December 31 and expect that charitable gift to go through. So if you're a business owner, right, and you're looking at maybe a high income year, you're approaching the sale, I would say whoever's your philanthropic advisor, dial that team in, those individuals in sooner before you're selling the business, because you don't want to end up with a prearranged sales situation. You don't want to end up in a situation where, hey, you were looking to maybe donate some of your company stock, but now you've sold the business, so you're stuck with cash.
Yeah.
Like all those things are really, really important. So the business owner needs to lean on their advisor, and the advisor needs to bring in the philanthropic team, the charitable back office, the special team, to help execute at that moment, at that time. Timing is really, really critical, but planning is always better. More planning is always better than less planning.
Yeah. I love how you threw in the special teams in there again.
I love it.
Ravens special teams look really good on this.
Really good this year.
Just had to throw that in there again. I know we're getting ready to finish up, but I thought a little bit about, we've had some tax policy changes, and how does that affect the charitable giving space with the One Big Beautiful Bill, and just kind of looking through things that folks may not know that would be helpful, especially in this space. Any changes and things that we should be aware of there as well?
Yeah, we've seen the growth of donor advised funds, particularly over the last 10 years and 10 to 15 years. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and the One Big Beautiful Bill last year, 2025, are really a big part of that growth.
Okay.
Right. When we saw the Florida Itemize be raised in 2017, right, we see a lot of people doing charitable bunching now, where they're bunching multiple years of charitable gifts into 1 year to get over that threshold, right? The One Big Beautiful Bill really kind of kept that momentum going. On the corporate side, the One Big Beautiful Bill did institute a 1% floor on corporate charitable deductions. So the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy up in Indianapolis, they are estimating a reduction in corporate giving.
Okay.
So we'll kind of see how this kind of plays out. I'm not necessarily sure one way or another, and I'm not a statistician, so and so we'll kind of see. I'm altruistic, so I kind of hope people are going to give because they feel good, and businesses know that giving is good for their communities. And so I'm optimistic we're going to continue to see philanthropic gifts regardless. But with the tax legislations of last year, whether you're a business, an individual, or a family, the charitable giving rules are more nuanced and more complicated now. The 1% floor on corporate charitable deductions, there's now a 0.5% floor on itemized deductions that needs to be met. And there's now a 35% cap on the value of deductions for top bracket filers, right? So there's a lot more nuances now around charitable giving legislation that really requires more advanced planning.
Uh-huh.
So if you're an advisor, talk to your clients about it sooner rather than later. Don't wait till Thanksgiving. I would say it has to be earlier than that. Yeah. Definitely don't wait till December. Have these conversations. We're also seeing, because of these charitable legislations, that people who are charitable and have the wealth and the cash flow and the capacity to continue to make gifts, they're making bigger gifts,
okay,
right? because of the rules, they're maybe making bigger gifts at fewer intervals. Again, charitable bunching. So that's just requiring a lot more advanced planning. So talk to your advisor. If you're an advisor, talk to your clients, be proactive. Even if the answer is no, you still covered your bases. And that's really, really important. Though the one big beautiful bill is just making planning an imperative, really necessary.
Yeah, I think that, for us, and particularly with the Dream Makers Network, having more of these type of conversations with individuals, with business owners, to increase more philanthropic activity, but for the purpose of matching with someone's really core objectives about their life, if you will.
Right.
It is that intersection between how do I want to spend my time day to day, whether it be now while I'm still working, or how will I spend my time during retirement, and matching that with a philanthropic need, with a community need that could very well add value to your tax strategy as well. But to be able to connect the dots where we're not trying to force, a square into a circle and all that jazz, but we're really helping to connect the dots between socio issues, economic issues, that also solves a political government policy issue. So it can be done. And if we're in a position where the numbers are saying it looks like corporate giving may begin to drop, that's kind of a charge for us to get involved and really have more conversations like this.
Absolutely. Because whether you're a business or an individual, very rarely do we see is tax as a top 3 motivating factor in the decision to be charitable, right? People are charitable because they were raised to be charitable. Oftentimes people saw the bowl being passed down the church pew, right? And the expectation was you made a gift to your, you made a gift to your house of worship, right? And so that instilled a lot of philanthropic attitudes across the United States. I'm a big believer in how can we catalyze the next generation of philanthropists. So seeing giving circles across the country. Here in Central Florida, we have a giving circle for women called 100 Women Strong.
Yeah.
And it's a great way for local women who want to take on a more philanthropic and leadership role in our community while learning what's going on in their backyard, right? And they get to do it with their peers and their friends, and they get to learn from each other, and it's social and it's fun. But they're not necessarily joining it because of the tax considerations, though that may be a factor 3, 4, 5, or 6.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people are charitable because they're interested or they were raised that way.
Yeah.
And then tax becomes a conversation or a consideration down the line. Now, I will say that oftentimes there's a finance or a taxable event or a non-charitable event that creates the moment of urgency for a charitably inclined individual to get more organized. And we often see that. So it is a bit of a two-way street.
Yeah.
But taxes are rarely the number one consideration in aggregate for why people are charitable. So that's why I'm optimistic that we're going to continue to see charitable activity from those who are already charitable, because quite frankly, they care about their community.
I would wholeheartedly agree about that. Steve, I got to tell you, man, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So glad we did this. I want to make sure that folks know how to get in contact with Central Florida Foundation, how to connect with you and your team who are interested in participating and maybe joining and setting up a donor advised fund. What is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, you can go to Central Florida Foundation's website, cffound.org. My email and contact information is on the website. They can also find me on LinkedIn, send me a connection, and reach out there. Would love to sit down with folks. We can grab a cup of coffee throughout Central Florida, or we can jump on a Zoom meeting. At the Central Florida Foundation, we serve our community, so we are happy to field inquiries from anyone and let people know how they can make an impact here in Greater Orlando.
I love it. cffound.org. cffound.org is the best way to learn more about the Central Florida Foundation and connect. I am more than thankful that you took this time to connect with us and share with us on this call. I think there's so much more to do. You've kind of sparked a couple ideas around giving circles, and
Great.
I know a lot of people who would love to do this. And so I'm pretty sure this isn't the end of this conversation. It's just the beginning. And so again, thank you for your time, taking kind of your lunch break or maybe a pre-lunch just to have a conversation with us on getting into some good trouble with the Dream Makers Network. Thank you again, and we look forward to staying connected soon and doing more work throughout Central Florida.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.